Critique: The Comprehensive Guide to Apologetics. General Editor Joseph M. Holden. Chapter 5. What is the relationship between faith and reason? Mark M. Hanna. Per usual, the link to the reading of this chapter is in the description below. And now that we've all read it, let's get to it. Alrighty, there are a few things that I want to go over in this chapter, so let's go ahead and get started. Quote, some of the most intense debates between Christians and secularists often concern the relationship between faith and reason, end quote. This, of course, taken from the very first sentence of the chapter. And the problem I have with it, of course, is that, and they do mention it later on, is that Christians also disagree about the relationship between faith and reason. Again, they mention it. The presuppositionalists, they contend that you cannot reason at all without Christ or without God allowing you to reason. And these internecine type of squabbles can be interesting, but I'm most concerned with, quote, the term fallen refers to sin and its damaging consequences which affect our ability to act properly and to think correctly. Scripture leaves no doubt that sin distorts our thinking as well as our attitudes, motives, and action. And to me, this is a slippery slope. Once you start considering your fellow human beings as less than, it gives one license to do all manner of ill. A rudimentary peek at Christian history will reveal these facts. And then the other issue would be this. If your mind is damaged by sin, how can you be sure that you've received revelation from God and not from, say, an evil entity? The Bible does say that Satan can appear as an angel of light. If the mind is sin damaged from birth, how can anyone properly interpret any revelation from any God? And if the claim is that once you receive this revelation, the sin block is somehow removed, then please explain how one can still sin after receiving Christ's so-called salvation. Paul even talked about a besetting sin that he had. So how do you know the revelation you received is from God? And this in conjunction with the problem of interpretation. How do you know you have the proper interpretation of the Bible? This, of course, after you demonstrate the Bible is actually reliable and not just fables and mythology. Again, I maintain that the Bible is nothing better than historical fiction. Quote, critics of Christianity generally view faith and reason as foes, since critics are inclined to define faith as gullibility, by which they mean that faith is either believing something without reason and evidence or believing something against reason and evidence. Now, Hanna calls this fideism and is strictly against fideism, seemingly. I think every Christian is a fideist. The reason being is because the object of your faith cannot be demonstrated to exist. Quote, when it comes to answering questions about ultimate reality, however, reason is not self-sufficient, but requires divine revelation. Apart from the Bible, we are left with nothing but speculation about the nature and destiny of human beings. Right. There's this weird thing, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, there's this strange thing called science. It's been used for centuries now to discover the world around us. You know, that thing. About the nature of humanity and the nature of our world around us, science has discovered far more than the Bible has ever revealed. Other than death, demonstrate destiny exists. For anything else, it's almost embarrassing to make the claim that anyone needs the Bible to understand the world around them or to understand human nature. Quote, faith is always directed into something or someone. That is, faith always has an object. The crucial question is whether that object has the credentials to justify our trust. Cf. Acts 1:3-2:22. One cannot discover trustworthiness without using reason. Yes, I agree with that last part. You need to be able to use your reason in order to discern whether or not a thing or a person can be trusted. The issue I have, of course, is where is the object of Christian faith? What is the demonstration that the Christian God exists and exists to the exclusion of all other gods? And if your source is the Bible, then you've already lost because you're engaging in circular reasoning. Every extra biblical source that says anything about Christianity talks about Christians and what they believe, but does not demonstrate whatever if that Christianity is true or that the things that the Christians believed actually happened historically. Every philosophical argument for a God fails. And I'll demonstrate that the further we get into this book. And I know they're going to start getting into the philosophical arguments of God sooner or later. So, something to look forward to. So what's left? What's left is personal experience and divine revelation. And I've already discussed why divine revelation doesn't quite work unless you can demonstrate how God gets past your sin-addled mind. Personal experience isn't good evidence for anyone else, because then I would have to consider the personal experiences of everyone else in differing religions. And then I would have to consider that those gods are real because of their personal experiences. So, to reiterate, every Christian is a fideist, no matter what this Mr. Hanna says. Quote, but rational deliberation is not possible unless we are free to follow the evidence where it leads. Where determinism completely reigns, there are only causes and no reasons. Advocates of materialistic naturalism, anti-supernaturalism, think everything is the deterministic result of blind, impersonal, physical causes. Biblical theism, however, accounts for both reason and freedom. I am a naturalist, but not to be confused with philosophical naturalism. I'm not claiming that only matter and energy exists. I am claiming that it seems like the material world is the only world that we can investigate at the moment. So the supernatural world, I give no consideration because I don't think it exists. When Hanna says, quote, where determinism completely reigns, there are only causes and no reasons, end quote. Isn't a cause a reason? Like, causes are reasons. What do you mean? And what difference to me does it make that the world is completely deterministic? I have a consciousness that seemingly gives me a measure of free will, and I can make shit up if I want. I can give significance to anything I want. So I don't care if it's deterministic. My consciousness can override determinism, and then it doesn't even matter if the determinism is like ultimate reality. Again, my consciousness can override it or at least ignore it. In other words, if strict determinism is actual reality, I don't have to become a nihilist. Quote, biblical theism, however, accounts for both reason and freedom. I think this is rich. Because in many ways, the Bible tries to override reason. And freedom, that's just laughable. First of all, the Bible advocates for slavery, both the Old and the New Testaments. And God doesn't really give you a choice. You either, according to the Bible, you either have to choose Christ or it's hell. Or separation from Christ, however you want to fucking label it. So that's not a choice. That's like a mafia boss saying, hey, I like your business there. You need to go ahead and pay me a tax to keep you protected. It would sure be an awful thing if something were to happen to it. Right? The threat is coming from the mafia boss, much in the way that the threat is coming from God. That's not freedom. That's another form of enslavement. This time mental and so-called spiritual. Now I'm sure a few more criticisms could have been leveled at this chapter. What did you notice when you read it or listened to my audio version? Comment below. Do you disagree with anything I've said? Comment below. And that's what I got for you, folks. Despite any disagreements we may have, be well on your journey.